Okay. We can gather around here. I had to turn my speaker off so we don't get feedback. Too many little things on this stuff yet to learn. Welcome to Energy and Utilities. We're now in session, order, whatever you want to call it. I want to welcome everybody here, Thursday, February 11th. First off, item of business, I'd like to see if anybody'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes. Representative Delberdang. Seconded by Representative Gartner. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, same sign. Minutes pass. Informational briefing. Today we're going to have an informational briefing, an overview of the Kansas Electric Cooperative, listened by the new CEO, Major General, or whatever you want to call it, Lee Taffanelli. You know, there seems to be a lot of that going around into...
Mr. Chairman, it's indeed a privilege and honor to be here. Vice Chairman Schreiber, Ranking Member Keither, members of the House Committee on Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications. I am Lee Taffanelli, and I serve as the CEO for the Kansas Electric Cooperatives. And I do want to thank you again for the opportunity to appear today on behalf of the KEC to provide a brief overview of our Association of Rural Electric Cooperatives. The Kansas Electric Cooperatives is a statewide service organization for the 27 electric distribution cooperatives and the 3 generation and transmission cooperatives. Formed in 1941 and headquartered in Topeka, Kansas, KEC represents the interest of and provides needed services and programs to the electric co-ops providing electric service to Kansas. Our major programming areas include advocacy, communications, and education. And this year, I would note that the KEC celebrates its 80th year of serving rural electric cooperatives across the state of Kansas. KEC has 2 staff members that you'll see regularly, and I'm sure are no strangers to this committee. It's Leslie Kaufman, our Vice President of Government Relations and Legal Counsel, and Doug Shepard, which is KEC's Vice President of Management Consulting Services. KEC contracts also with Devine, Donnelly, and Murray for additional advocacy support. And we also have 3 of our members also have a daily presence in the State House, either through staff lobbyists, contract lobbyists, or both. And they are KEPCO, which is Kansas Electric Power Cooperative, and they're represented by Phil Wages. And then Sunflower Electric Cooperative is represented by Claire Guston, and Midwest Energy by Mike Morley. KEC is organized, if you don't know, as a member-owned cooperative, and our members are the member-owned electric cooperatives throughout the state. They're governed by their individual trustees representing their fellow consumer members. The generation and transmission co-ops, or G&Ts as we call them, provide wholesale power to the distribution cooperatives who then deliver it to the end consumer members. There are 2 G&Ts that are headquartered in Kansas. Again, those are KEPCO and Sunflower, and each is owned by the distribution cooperatives that they serve. These 2 G&Ts also are KEC members, and they share common distribution co-op members with KEC. The other is our 27 distribution cooperative members that deliver safe, reliable, affordable, and secure electric service to nearly 300,000 homes, businesses, and institutions. This transmission and distribution network includes over 80,000 miles of line in 103 counties, covering nearly 75% of the state's geographic area. Member control is the foundation of the cooperative business model. Co-op governance is based on democratic principles. By statute and custom, each member has 1 vote, placing everyone on equal footing, regardless of their energy use. Those members enact bylaws and govern the cooperative and its relationship with its members. The members, through their bylaws, can determine whether they elect board trustees by district or at large, and how many trustees they have, and the qualifications of each trustee. Some co-op bylaws enact residency requirements for trustees. It's similar to the residency requirements for elected officials, and recognizes that one's connection to and understanding of a community can be very different when you live in that community versus commuting in for a day job or managing a business in that area from afar. Kansas law requires board trustees be co-op members, but other qualifications for trustees reflect the values of each of the cooperative's consumer members. Kansas law allows for cooperative members to elect to self-regulate rates, and all electric cooperatives in Kansas have done so. The member-elected trustees approve cooperative rate changes, but such action must be taken in a meeting open to all of its members. The ability to self-govern is critical. It's a structural element of the co-op's business model. It lies at the heart of what it means to be a democratically controlled cooperative, and protecting that right is a central tenet of our advocacy program. Co-op members always have a voice in their cooperative governments. This can take many forms, including electing their board members, completing member satisfaction surveys, and participating at co-op meetings. And probably most importantly, board members and co-op leadership are accessible in their communities daily, whether they're at a grocery store, gas station, or a high school sporting event. Members may also petition the Kansas Corporation Commission for review. In the nearly 30 years since the deregulation statute was enacted, no co-op's rates have been declared unjust, unreasonable, unjustly discriminatory, or unduly preferential by the Commission. And time has shown that self-regulation works to the benefit of its members. Cooperatives can react to unexpected circumstances more nimbly. They save hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal and consulting fees normally associated with a full-blown commission rate case. In fact, the London Economic International's January 2020 study validated the co-op experience in their portion of the Kansas electricity rate study commissioned under the Senate Bill 69. And it said, quote, "The ownership nature of co-ops in terms of being owned by the very customers they serve is conducive to promoting the public interest. Thus, LEI can conclude that there is sufficient organizational and economic incentives for co-ops to set rates in a way that prioritizes public interest." For some of you, the population density in your district makes it easy to walk door to door. Others must drive miles and miles between homes. In either case, population density affects how you connect with your district. Likewise, dispersal has a major impact on a utility's overall cost of service. Electric rates vary from co-op to co-op. Each cooperative has a different customer mix, load profile, and geographic area. All of these impact the overall cost of service. Fixed costs are spread over the number of customers per line mile, and the more customers per line mile, the lower the fixed cost per customer. Some of the least populated areas in the state fall within our cooperative territory. For our Kansas-based distribution co-ops, the average number of meters per line mile ranges from a low of 1.8 to a high of 7.1. In comparison, municipal utilities average 40 to 50, and investor-owned utilities average 25 to 30. As LEI correctly noted, higher co-op rates do not necessarily reflect inefficiencies or ineffectiveness of the rate-making practices. Co-ops exist to bring electricity to rural areas that IOUs are reluctant to serve. In general, these areas have a lower number of customers per area or customer density, which means that more infrastructure investments are needed to reach load centers. It is still possible to talk to cooperative members today that remember when the lights came on in rural Kansas. It changed their lives, enhanced their safety, brought new economic opportunities, and more importantly, it powered their dreams. It is critically important that the state not embark on electric industry structural changes that may make it more expensive to serve our co-op members. Concern for our community, one of the co-op's principles, drives co-ops to work for the benefit of those that they serve and why they can be an integral partner in closing today's rural-urban gap, the digital divide. Electric cooperatives are examining innovative ways to advance broadband build-out, whether that be individually or alongside other rural providers. It is an expensive endeavor, and public-private partnering will be the key to expanding reliable, high-speed broadband access. Cooperatives have been and continue to be at the forefront of meeting some of their communities and our state's biggest challenges. Daily, we demonstrate the power of working together to accomplish more with each other than we can individually. KEC and our member cooperatives will continue to work for sound public policy objectives that better the lives of our members and improve the communities in which we live and serve. We look forward to partnering with you on these important issues to the Kansas electric co-ops. thank you again for the honor and privilege of appearing in front of this committee.
Thank you. It's rather obvious using the military where you commanded that way you did that. That's really good. Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Tefnella? Seeing none? Oh. Hello. My vice chair is supposed to be recognizing that. Representative Keither.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman. Lee, I'm curious about your mentioning of broadband build-out. Are you working with any other companies to understand where it's needed, or how are you approaching that?
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Keither, so the way we've approached it really is in two fashions. Of course, each of our electric cooperatives has their own business model, and depending on the area in which they live, there's a different saturation in terms of what the needs of broadband may be for that individual community. So you may have in some cases where we have a couple of our electric cooperatives that are actually working to and have subsidiaries that work to bring broadband to that area and support broadband. Others are partnering with other companies, that telecommunications companies that provide broadband in that area. And our general philosophy on that, it really is that if it's good for rural Kansas, it's good for our electric cooperatives, either directly or indirectly.
Well, that's what I wanted to hear. Thank you for that, and it's good to see you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, I didn't recognize you there. I was watching on that right for the little hand up, but it was on your viral one. Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, I want to thank you for coming. And I want to take a little break away from this meeting for a second to present you with a plaque for Mr. Vice Chair. You want to help?
Smile, Annie.
Smile, Annie. You're getting your picture taken.
I want to kind of thank you. I think I've been on a co-op line probably 60 years of my life. So thank you to you and the companies that provide it, which is Ark Valley, that I'm privileged to be on. Okay, moving on. Next, we have a presentation from AECOM, and it's virtual. Are you on the line?
Yes, we are. Karen, can you pull up the presentation?
Okay, welcome to committee. And if you could state your name and who you represent for the record.
Good morning, everyone. This is William Haas. I'm an Associate Vice President with Energea, and I have two of my colleagues with me right now. Could you both introduce yourselves?
My name is Ezra Beeman. I'm Managing Director with Energea.
And good morning. I'm Karen Massey with AECOM.
Welcome to committee, and we're ready for your presentation.
Thank you very much. We welcome the opportunity to present this information to you today. We are going over the study of consequential issues materially affecting Kansas electricity rates. The study was conducted by AECOM in partnership with our colleagues at Energea, our subcontractor for the project. And the study came out of Senate Bill 69 and the 13 questions that were posed within that bill. Next slide. So today, since there are 13 questions, we are going to move quickly through them, but provide all of the most important points within the study. If there are follow-up questions, we are happy to address them. We're going to go over the process by which the study was completed and also the key findings to those questions. Next slide. As previously mentioned, myself, I am an associate vice president with AECOM. I work within our energy practice, and I have 16 years of experience working in the energy industry, primarily on policy and regulatory issues for utilities and governments. Karen and Ezra, would you both introduce yourselves?
Thanks, Bill. My name's Karen Massey. I'm a senior consultant with AECOM. I'm actually based out of Missouri, out of central Missouri, and I have a background in infrastructure, finance, and utility work. And Ezra, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Ezra Beeman. I'm based in Energea's California office. I've been in electricity about 20 years and spent a good part of that with a utility. I tend to specialize in rates, cost of service, and distributed energy resources. Thank you.
Next slide, Karen. Ezra, would you overview the process, please?
Apologies. So the overall process for the study, and it was quite a comprehensive study, lots of questions, lots of detail. In order for us to tackle those questions, our first step was to issue requests for information. And these were pretty comprehensive, and we would really like to recognize the efforts of the utilities and co-ops and munis in doing their best to really get us all the information that we had requested. It was a very comprehensive process, and one where we feel like we got a lot of the data in a timely fashion and were able to complete a lot of the analysis. It wasn't totally complete, but it's fair to say that it was an awful lot of information to request, and it came just about the time that COVID started. So everybody was reeling from that at the same time. Once we had the information, or at the same time actually, we kicked off a stakeholder engagement process where we met with the utilities, we met with all stakeholders that expressed an interest, and we recorded their issues and their comments, and we factored that into our analysis. The analysis stage took both the stakeholder engagement input as well as the utility input and developed a range of analyses and models. And a lot of that focused on analysis of the power market, the transmission investment, and a great deal focused on the utility cost of service analysis and relating that to rate design and customer bill impacts. And then finally, we brought that all together in the report that was issued to yourselves and to the Kansas Utility Oversight Commission, Kansas Corporate Commission, KCC. Thank you. I'll turn that back over.
So this is Karen, and I'll apologize. I can't get my camera to work when share the screen at the same time for some reason. So I want to talk just a little bit more about the stakeholder engagement, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the report and how it was produced. So 33 individuals representing 24 non-utility entities attended group or individual stakeholder meetings. And the stakeholders represented a variety of interests, including, among others, business and industry, agriculture, renewable fuels, consumers, environmental interests, and education. Now, at the group meetings, a facilitated discussion was held around each area of the study. And as you can imagine, the discussion was very robust. So to ensure that stakeholders did get the ability to provide all information they wanted to, we encouraged them to provide additional information after the meetings. We also had observers at these meetings that didn't participate in the discussion, and this included staff from the Legislative Coordinating Council, Legislative Research, the Revisor Statutes, and the KCC. Now, following group stakeholder meetings, additional teleconferences were held with individual stakeholders who didn't get to attend the meetings or from whom we needed additional follow-up. Stakeholders ultimately submitted about 45 to 50 different items after the meetings to the project team. And these included written responses to the 13 areas that the SB 69 asked about, as well as articles, studies, data sets. A good variety of information was provided. And I have to say that stakeholder feedback was incredibly important. It provided a lot of additional context to utility-specific policies and then broader state and regional requirements. And this really helped the project team understand ratepayer concerns about how these policies may impact the utilities, rates, and services. Now, I also want to talk a little bit to you about the report. Following the analysis, the project team did produce a report which described the scope and approach of the study, how information was gathered, and for each of the 13 matters set forth in the Senate Bill 69, it provided a detailed description of the analysis and the findings. Now, two versions of the report were created. A public version in which any material marked confidential by the utilities and information derived therefrom was redacted, and a confidential version which was provided only to the Kansas Corporation Commission. Now, as Ezra mentioned, through the utility RFI process, there was a lot of back and forth, and some of the information that we were asking for, the utilities considered confidential. So we did enter into non-disclosure agreements with all of the utilities involved. And there were also protective order out by the KCC involving any confidential order. And I want to assure you that we were very sensitive to the fact that the utilities were very concerned about their confidential data, understandably so. And we took very seriously our duties under the KCC's protective order and our non-disclosure agreements. The very last thing that we wanted to do was to reveal the utilities' confidential information. So we took a very conservative approach to redacting confidential information in the first public version of the report. After the initial version was released, the KCC asked us to work with the utilities to determine whether previously redacted material could also be released. And we worked with each impacted utility very closely. And when all was said and done, almost all of the information was unredacted in a subsequently released public version of the report. And I have to say, I really want to compliment the utilities and their willingness to work through some very difficult issues and their flexibility in making sure that the public got to see as much information as was absolutely possible. Okay, Ezra, would you like to talk about some of our key findings?
Thank you, Karen. So the first question focused on the nature of the cost recovery of electric vehicle charging services. And we took a look at that question, and that was limited really to those utilities that had started offering a public charging service. And what we found was that it was unlikely that they were recovering this amount by other ratepayers. They had taken care to segregate that information. However, what we did find in the actual structure of the rates themselves is that if you are driving an electric vehicle, because of the way that they are structured, you're likely to be paying more than it actually costs the utility to provide the service for that electric vehicle charging, and that was our finding there. In question 2 on the electric vehicle charging services rate design, where it was requested that we provide some guidance, I guess, on how that might be best done. Naturally, one of our key recommendations here is that rate design should always be cost reflective. It should vary by the time of use of the charging service, and that it is increasingly common to see new rates being offered for EV charging because EVs are a little bit different than other types of load for a number of reasons. One is they can be quite flexible. People have a increasingly large battery, and they can choose when they actually recharge it, and that can have very beneficial outcomes for the grid, either maybe soaking up excess solar PV or just increasing utilization. So it's not uncommon when you're trying to compete with a different fuel source, be it natural gas or oil, to create a different sort of tariff to better serve and better compete for that end use's demand. Now, if the electricity grid could entice more EV usage and manage the charging effectively, that could have a beneficial impact on everyone else that uses the electricity grid, because it would help reduce the fixed costs, which could be spread over more energy throughput. Turning to question 3, which was focused on the potential effects of deregulating electric vehicle charging services, I think our 3 key messages here are economic theory tells us that competition is likely to increase choice and reduce costs for drivers. However, we would, at least in the near term, caveat that by saying it's more likely to be the case in urban centers. We heard the earlier talk by the head of the co-ops, and it's true that commercial businesses are going to first go where they can make the highest profit, and that really speaks to density. So one of the potential gaps in the electric vehicle services is likely to be in areas of lower consumer density, just because it's harder to make the business case. So there may be a role there for regulated charging, just to provide a basic connectivity service in more rural areas. Finally, at least on this slide, turning to advanced energy solutions, and the questions there was really, would there be a benefit to ratepayers if they had improved access to solar PV, electric vehicles, battery storage, microgrids, and transactive energy? In order for us to answer this question, we looked at the way the current level of programs that the utilities were offering. We looked at the way that those programs were compensating consumer investment or interest in these particular technologies. And what we found was solar is increasingly beneficial to the system. And when we say beneficial, we mean that the cost of, let's say, rooftop solar PV is whether or not adding it to the system is going to provide energy at a lower cost than you could otherwise purchase at that point. And what we found, given the falling costs of solar, rooftop solar PV in particular, that it is increasingly beneficial relative to the industry cost structure, but that current rate structures in particularly represent a barrier to efficient adoption. And that's because typically either what they call the net energy metering or other incentives are not tuned as well as they could be to help people making investment decisions make the right kind of investments, and that can increasingly lead to excess generation and what they call hosting cost to better integrate that resource. Turning to electric vehicles, right now we wouldn't say they're positive economic benefit to drivers, and that's primarily because of the premiums involved in buying one of these vehicles. Sure, they have a lower operating cost because of the difference between buying electricity for fuel and buying gasoline, but we see that changing because of the rapid decline in that premium by about 2026. But as we mentioned earlier, because of the rate structures, which can lead to EV drivers cross-subsidizing other electricity consumers, that presents a barrier that could be addressed through more efficient rate design. Battery storage, we're seeing that even further away, and that's really just because of the cost of storage. Now, there's going to be synergy between the rollout of electric vehicles, which represent a lot of storage, bringing down the cost for stationary storage, but this is a longer-term issue to be addressed by the industry. Finally, around microgrids, what we're seeing is that they are being increasingly used for areas of poor reliability, but also to help manage the risk of fires and wildfires by taking portions of the network off-grid, particularly in rural areas. And that should be taken a look at by utilities. We didn't see that that was something that was being widely used at the moment, but I would say it really is in the leading edge of areas where you're seeing that technology being used. Transactive energy, the buying and selling of excess solar or storage capacity by individual consumers, that really requires more resources, more solar, more storage, more EVs actually out there in the system before everyone's going to be able to take advantage of that. It is definitely something that promises the ultimate in consumer control and choice, and definitely should be something that is looked at, particularly when you're building new precincts that might have high levels of solar and batteries already installed. But for most folks, it's not, its time hasn't come yet. Thank you. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand this over to Bill.
Thank you, Ezra. So for the next two questions regarding the impacts of transmission investments on Kansas electricity rates and the costs and benefits of transmission investments used to import and export electricity, the project team took a quantitative approach and developed a quantitative analysis. The analysis involved the steps of collecting all the transmission investment data for each Southwest Power Pool transmission zone from the annual transmission revenue requirements data that are provided in open access transmission tariff reports. We used GIS software to extract demographic and employment data for the relevant geographies that correspond to those SPP transmission zones for each year of the analysis period, which was 2010 to 2019. We compared transmission investment, electricity rate, job and population growth data by each of those SPP transmission zones and the state based on a normalized service population. We aligned electricity rate data with transmission investment data to identify potential benefits and costs to the Kansas ratepayer associated with those electricity rates. We compared local marginal prices for each of the transmission zones to analyze the impact of transmission investments on generation costs, congestion costs, and load reliability. And we analyzed statewide generation and net exports for the state of Kansas and its 9 peer states to compare transmission investments to electricity exports over time. And what we found is that the impacts of transmission investments vary by utility type and utility size. We also found that transmission investments are the largest contributor to rate increases, and that there has been slower investments made in comparison to other Southwest Power Pool zones. With regards to the costs and benefits of transmission investments, the costs are largely offset by lower generation costs. The investment to export in 2018 was $64.5 million. And in terms of quantifiable benefits, we were able to estimate that up to 1,940 jobs, 127 million in earnings, and 58 million in tax revenues associated with the transmission investments that have been made thus far. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Ezra.
Could I interrupt here for just a second, please?
Please do.
We do have other presenters, so I don't know. We have a bill hearing yet today, so I'd like to have you, maybe if you could wrap up by 10 o'clock on your presentation. I don't know how long you have anticipated, but we only have one day this week, and we have a couple bills yet we have to hear next week. We'd be happy to have you come back, but if you could wrap it up maybe by 10 o'clock, I'd sure appreciate it.
Sure thing. Karen, next slide, please.
Okay, so turning to the next question, the impact of rising costs on Kansas IOUs on electric cooperatives and municipal utilities. What we found was IOUs at the moment are currently providing G&T services or generation and transmission services to only a very small fraction of the co-op market as of 2018. So even though costs have increased for the IOUs by up to 48% for those services, it only affects a very small fraction and declining fraction of the market. Other impacts around how the actual SPP markets are clearing their prices because of changes in the cost of G&Ts is very difficult to determine. So we weren't able to provide further guidance there. I will turn that back to.
I've got this, Ezra. Yeah. So there were two questions relating to economic development and retail electricity rates. The first was whether Kansas retail electricity rates are a material barrier to economic development in the state. Now, to analyze whether retail rates in Kansas are a barrier, the project team compared the economic health of Kansas generally to 9 peer states in the U.S. average. We identified industries that were most sensitive to retail electric rates, and then we compared the economic health of those industries to those in peer states. Now, in 2019, Kansas customers were generally, and I say generally because different rates for different customers, and that's what we found throughout the report, that things would vary by area. But generally, customers were paying higher electricity rates than the regional average. In the body of the report, there is information about a 20-year period that is broken down by customer class for Kansas and all states within the region so that you then can compare what those rates have looked like. Now, top-line economic growth in Kansas has been slower than in all 9 peer states included in the analysis since 2010. It appears that the electricity rates in Kansas likely contribute to such underperforming economic growth. However, the data does not signal that electricity rates are the sole explanatory factor, and these could simply be correlated to growth. Now, stakeholder input did identify companies who had chosen not to locate in Kansas who had curtailed activities due to rising electricity rates. Now, these examples are supported by some quantitative evidence that some industrial sectors have experienced less growth than in peer states and the U.S. average. Underperforming sectors include wholesale trade and real estate and leasing services, which use more electricity as a share of inputs than the average sector. Now, the other question that we were asked to look at relating to economic development was whether economic development rates have an impact on other customer classes and whether expanded utilization of such approaches can benefit all customer classes over time. Now, economic development rates provide benefits to residents and ratepayers through increased economic activity by new businesses and by lowering the electricity rates of all customer classes by spreading fixed costs amongst more ratepayers. Due to a few data gaps, we were not able to really estimate the impact of these rates on other customer classes. Instead, we performed a limited analysis, and we did research to identify industry best practices utilized to attract capital investment as well as to create and maintain jobs. Stakeholders suggested that while economic development rates may impact residential rates, the benefits associated with increasing electricity sales and increased economic activity may outweigh the cost of potential cross subsidies. And although it wasn't possible to determine if contractor economic development rates could, over time, lead to lower rates to all Kansas utility customers, it does not appear that the economic development rates materially impacted average rates in the limited sample that we were able to explore. Now, the discounted rates offered by Kansas investor-owned utilities fall within the range of discounts offered by comparable utilities in 9 peer states. On average, Kansas rates have had a lower load requirement, but also lower discounts than utilities in peer states. The data does indicate that the discounts provided by Kansas utilities may bridge the competitiveness gap for the first 5 years of business development compared to the average annual rate for the region. However, peer states also offer economic development rates which could impact the competitiveness. Now, utilities in some other states have attracted capital and investment through comprehensive economic development strategies that often are in coordination with other state efforts. These include, among other things, technical assistance, school-to-career pathways, and maintaining comprehensive incentive databases. Some utilities also provide additional eligibility requirement if the load investment is not met. So, Ezra, would you like to move on and talk about security?
Okay, I thought you was asking me, I'm sorry.
Okay, so question 10 was on, pose the question of, is cost recovery on the basis of cost causation? And what we found, and we did very detailed modeling of the cost of service with the information we were given. And what we found was that generation and transmission costs were generally being recovered based on cost causation principles. The only issue that we identified was that sometimes these models had been undertaken some years ago, and the cost factors may have changed in that time. So our recommendation here was to just consider whether or not those cost of service models should be updated more frequently to better reflect the current state of our understanding of costs. Turning to question 11, the impact of cyber and physical security and grid stabilization efforts on rates. Looking at the expenditure trends over the last little while, we found that they only accounted for, at least the physical and cybersecurity accounted for about 1.5% of rates. They are expected to increase, and we could see an upward trend. Grid stabilization, which we defined as being additional investments to deal with intermittent resources like wind, found that accounted for about 4 to 9% of expenditure, and that varied, of course, by utility. One of the challenges we faced was in just comparing apples to apples. So, and also actually getting access to some of the data. So data reporting standards and cost recovery oversight mechanisms was an option we thought that could be considered. Next slide, please. I think this is.
Yeah, so one of the things we were also asked to look at was the value of an utility integrated resource planning process that requires a state regulatory approval. So we found a number of things here, and there's a very detailed analysis of different actions that the state could take or the state could look at in the report. But we did find that most states have planning requirements, which are more specific than those of Kansas. And in fact, almost all Kansas utilities already participate in some type of a resource planning activity. Now, the benefits that both utilities and stakeholders identified relating to integrated resource planning processes were investment deferral, the integration of efficiency and distributed resources, transparency in process, and consistency. Now, should Kansas decide to move forward with a state-required integrated resource planning process, our recommendations is that they should first determine what their desired policy objectives and goals would be, and then they could pick the various and assorted requirements that might be needed to help further those policy objectives. All right, Ezra, would you like to talk about fuels?
Thank you, Karen. So the final question we looked at was an economic analysis of generation fuel price fluctuations on the cost of electricity. And to do this, we did a statistical analysis of the relationship between fuel prices and SPP prices. And what we found was that there was a very high correlation of changes in pool prices and changes in fuel prices, accounting for between 79 and 96% of all price variations. Now, when you take it down to the customer level, because generation and transmission are a fraction of the total customer bill, you're only looking at about 50 to 75% of the cost variations. But keeping in mind that the larger energy consumers connect at a higher voltage, they are more exposed to changes in wholesale market prices due to fuel price variations than mass market retail consumers who connect at the low voltage level and pay for more distribution network. Thank you.
So with that, in 5 minutes before 10 o'clock, we've been able to go through the key findings of the report. We'll also make this presentation available for those of you who might want to look into it in more detail. And we also encourage you to take a look at the report and the issues that have been identified and the recommendations that were made. On behalf of AECOM and Energeo, we very much appreciate your time today.
Be available to stand for questions real quick if we have any.
Absolutely.
Any questions for the presenters? In the meantime, while we're looking for questions, I would like to invite you again to Tuesday. We have some spare time Tuesday if you would like to present another half hour for the committee, because I think it's very good to understand all this, and you did a great job presenting today. So you're welcome to do that if you'd like to Tuesday also, because you have a lot of good information that we could use, especially for the new committee members.
We'd be happy to do that. I would suggest that perhaps after the committee members have had an opportunity to digest the information and maybe look through the report, we could make ourselves available for questions at that time. Because I know this is a very technical report and a lot of detailed information, so it takes a little time to synthesize it and develop those questions.
Good. I have a question for you from Representative Schreiber.
Not so much a question, but it did spark your last comment to let the committee know that both the first report and the second report are available on the KCC's website. You know, I don't think anybody's going to be venturing out this weekend, so to keep warm, why don't you download that report and read it? They're both available. There's one first phase and then the second phase, which is the one AECOM did. So just wanted to let members know that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? One last call for questions.
Yes.
And Representative Mr. Schreiber, you're supposed to be watching for those.
He apparently doesn't like me today.
Yes, Representative Keither.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could we get a hard copy of the presentation from today to go? Because it's hard to follow along with the other report. I was trying. It's very difficult to get to the pages and know where we're supposed to be. So is that going to be a possibility?
We can definitely provide this electronically, and if you'd like a hard copy, we could get that sent off, but it wouldn't be very quick, as we're all about these days.
Well, it would be helpful to go along with the other very comprehensive report that you all did. So thank you. That would be great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Well, we'll get with our committee assistant here and talk about it Tuesday. Her and I visited a little bit just now about it. And we would be happy to put you on there for a half hour again to talk about it and give us some more key points.
Thank you all very much for your time.
Okay, thank you, William. I appreciate that. And Ezra and Karen also appreciate your time and very detailed report. Thank you. Okay, committee, we're going to move on to open a hearing on HB 2108, requiring changes to electric rates for transmission costs to be approved through the electric utility general rate case proceedings. Revisor, would you give us an overview?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, committee. Nick Myers with the Revisor's Office. So committee, House Bill 2180 concerns electric utilities and recovery of transmission-related costs. The current law in 66-1237 allows electric utilities the option to recover transmission-related costs through transmission delivery charges, or TDCs. This charge appears separately on a customer's bill, and utilities use these transmission delivery charges to recover costs that are associated with the Southwest Power Pool's transmission service. House Bill 2180 would provide that a utility could not use a TDC to recover transmission-related costs unless the utility already has a TDC established. And the bill sets out two ways in which a utility with a TDC could change its charge. So first, the utility could file an application with the Kansas Corporation Commission for a general retail rate proceeding to change the TDC. And then the other option would be the utility could change it pursuant to an order of a regulatory authority having jurisdiction over transmission matters that changes the transmission rate or a component of such transmission rate. The KCC could also instigate a change to the TDC upon that federal transmission rate change. The bill would also provide that only the retail portion of an electric utility's transmission costs could be recovered from retail ratepayers through a TDC. And Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
We do have one on queue. Representative Keither, Vice Ranking Minority Member.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I think I just forgot to put my hand down from the previous presentation. I will do that now.
Here we're trying to be accurate this time. Thank you. We needed a good laugh. Okay, moving right along. Any other questions for the reviser? Seeing none, we'll go to the proponents of the bill. First up is Elizabeth Patton with Americans for Prosperity, and this is, I always say viral, but it's virtual. Are you on?
I am on. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we got you. Welcome to committee. State your name and who you're with for the record.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Elizabeth Patton. I am the State Director for Americans for Prosperity Kansas, and I'm here on behalf of thousands of our activists in our state and the folks we speak with every year when we talk to them at their doors. And we support this bill because at the end of the day, uncompetitive electricity rates are the key driver of a high cost of living for our state. When even a 1 cent per kilowatt hour change in a residential rate could cost or save the average Kansan over $100 a year, which might seem small, but to especially low income families, that can be a big deal, even in their monthly budget. And according to one estimate, over 60,000 Kansas households have incomes of 50% or more below the federal poverty line, and yet they still pay 29% of their annual income simply for their home energy bills. And according to the Energy Information Administration, Kansas has had the highest residential electricity rates in the last couple of years, showing rates that consistently have put us above the region, which we've been hearing time and time again. And that is of great concern to us and has been for quite some time. In 2003, as we know, the legislature created the transmission delivery charge for utilities to invest in transmission. But from our perspective, 18 years to pay for a transmission incentive with very little to no transparency from the utility is just the kind of top-down policy that at the end of the day hurts consumers and further exacerbates energy poverty for Kansans. We just heard that these costs are the largest contributors to our rate increases from the study that was we just heard from those previous conferees. I wanted to highlight that and also point out that Kansas, as we know, has fallen behind the rest of the region when it comes to electric rate policies, and policies like this being in place can help make Kansas a state where affordable and reliable energy can be the key driver of prosperity and economic opportunity. So we support reform to regulatory policies such as this one that will help, that will be, at the end of the day, mutually beneficial for our state and ratepayers. So we think that this is an important bill that will take us one step further towards helping Kansas become more competitive, helping ratepayers have more affordable energy costs, and putting our state in a better direction for prosperity. Thank you, and I would be happy to stand for questions.
Any questions? Representative Samsel.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Elizabeth. I'm glad to hear that you are speaking to, I think you used the word activist throughout Kansas. I'm interested to know, are you speaking with any of the folks in my neck of the woods down in Garnett, Osawatomie, Wellsville, and not to put you on the spot, but I genuinely like to know whether it's whoever works for you guys or who you're talking to in my district. I want to make sure we're having an open line of conversation, and not just on this issue, but with property taxes and some other things.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk with Kansans all over the state, and that does include your district, and we have over the last several years. So we have had similar conversations to this going back at least from when I started with Americans for Prosperity a couple of years ago in my previous role, where we were doing lots of identification and studies and surveys with folks across Kansas on the issues that are important to them, and also looking at these from a policy perspective and different communities and finding out how we can find policies that are most impactful for our state to put us on a better path for prosperity.
I would appreciate that contact information if you are able to share that at some point, because this is a little bit off topic, but I know with some of the property tax and other income tax issues, it looks like what I'm hearing from my district is maybe not 100% on board with maybe what you guys are hearing. So that would be helpful if you wouldn't mind sharing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Elizabeth, for being here.
I would be happy to. Mr. Chairman, if I can respond, we're talking about energy rates today, and that issue alone has been one of the top responses across the state and all of the districts where we've been working over the last couple of years. And to that point, I would be happy, Representative Samsel, to come talk to you about the information we do have related to the burden of property taxes and the tax burden overall on a separate conversation. So absolutely.
That would be greatly appreciated to some of the pieces of mail that show up in our mailbox. So I look forward to that. Thank you.
Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Patton, for the information. You just mentioned that rising electric rates were at the top, I believe, of recent surveys. I'm not sure if you use surveys word or not, but when you supply the additional information to maybe Representative Samsel, maybe you could provide, kind of that ranking of what issues came to the top when you went out and spoke to folks.
I would be happy to. I would be happy to get you some more concrete data on that, but just off the top of my head, both energy rates and tax burden on Kansas families were the absolute top two issues that we get constantly from Kansans all across our state. And we saw that. It wasn't just our organization that saw that. I think we also saw that reflective over the last year pretty consistently.
Thank you. Representative Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Elizabeth, thank you. A question. You mentioned transparency. So do you believe that the TDC and the process we have today for IOUs is not transparent?
That's our perspective. We think that this is not a transparent policy, that at the end of the day is a top-down one that hurts consumers and exacerbates some of the energy issues in our state. It's not this isn't the silver bullet, it's not the main driver of that, but this is an important component, an important step towards this bill. It's an important step towards improving that very issue in our perspective.
Okay, I don't understand the process entirely, but I believe IOUs have to go in front of the commission and apply. There's probably some kind of hearing. We get the Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board involved. So I would say I question that there isn't a lot of transparency through that process. And I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. I appreciate those comments. At the end of the day, what's happening in Kansas isn't working for Kansas ratepayers. We are 13% higher than Missouri, which is right next door, and one of the highest, in our entire region. And when you're talking about the Kansas Corporation Commission, they have the second most regulatory restrictions on the books of our entire state agencies, second only to KDHE. So from our perspective, there is a lot of work to be done from the energy perspective for Kansas ratepayers so that we can get to the bottom of what's ultimately causing us to be that much higher than the region. And that's just, we don't believe it ought to be that way.
Any other questions for Ms. Patton? Representative Keither, are you sure your hand's up on the right deal?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Elizabeth. I understand your concerns, and certainly this committee is very aware of the issue of rate charges and concerns in the region. Obviously, we've had 2 studies that we've paid for, and but my concern is that if we pass this piece of legislation the way it's written at this point, then they're going to go in front of the commission and go for a rate case study or decision, and we pay for that. The taxpayers pay for that. So I think this is a little, I don't even know the right word to use, but I think it's an unusual request when you're trying to protect ratepayers when we're going to end up paying for this decision. So I'm struggling with this a little bit. So maybe you can enlighten me with some other information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? And we're going to try to move quickly here because we've got several conferees on both sides. Robert Vincent, Kansas Industrial Consumer Group, are you here? Welcome to committee. Please state your name and who you represent.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, ranking member, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Robert Vincent. I'm here on behalf of the Kansas Industrial Consumers Group and Kansans for Lower Electric Rates, which is an advocacy subgroup of that first entity. And it's my first time testifying before this committee. It's an exciting day for me and an honor and pleasure to be with you as we discuss one of the most critical topics facing the state, and that is the price for electricity that we pay. I'm testifying today in support of House Bill 2180. We believe it has great potential to moderate the pace of electric increases in Kansas. You have my written testimony before you. This morning I'll walk through our rationale behind supporting the bill, what the bill does, and the benefits, the tangible benefits ratepayers and the utility will receive if this legislation is enacted. For years, rates have been an important issue in this case, and we've had a tremendous amount of data and study to examine this. The consultants' reports that were ordered by this legislature came from a piece of legislation that said, let's find ways to craft policy to get regionally competitive electric rates. And what those consultants' reports show is the price for transmission is a key driver for the increases that Kansans are facing. That's why we believe focusing on transmission is an important topic for this legislative session. This bill, House Bill 2180, amends the TDC statute in one simple way. It changes when a utility can recover its costs for transmission from an annual basis to when they file a rate case, just like they recover the majority of the costs they incur to serve their customers. And that results in a statute that's favorable to ratepayers and it's favorable to utilities. It's favorable to ratepayers because it slows down the pace at which these costs can be recovered. And that's going to ensure utility management is careful when they're putting plant into service. It's also beneficial to the utilities because this statute keeps the provision that those costs will be conclusively deemed prudent. When the utility files a rate case at the KCC, there will be no debate over whether these costs are just and reasonable. It's set in stone that they will be recovered from ratepayers. You have to remember the majority of these transmission costs that are recovered to the TDC are costs that our investor-owned utilities have direct control over. It's time to treat them like every other cost that they have control over. Now today, I mentioned the TDC allows that charge to be updated annually, even if the utility is under a rate freeze, like Evergy. Evergy is a great example. They're under a base rate moratorium right now, but based on publicly available data, we know that come this spring, their transmission delivery charge will increase over $30 million. And to put that in context for you, that will completely eliminate the reductions ratepayers received last year when this body passed House Bill 2585 and eliminated state income tax for utilities. That was about a $22 million reduction for Evergy Kansas Central, the former Westar system, and those rates are projected to increase about $36 million by my math. I have no doubt there'll be discussion today about how the TDC allows reductions to be passed through quickly and how over a number of years the TDC has gone down versus up. And I want to tell you, the frequency of that change isn't the relevant factor. If your TDC increases $20 million 1 year and then decreases 1 the second and then decreases 2 the third, yeah, you've had more decreases than increases, but you're net up. That's a real cost ratepayers pay. We're concerned about rates because rates is the relevant issue. There's been a lot of discussion about bills Kansas pay and our regional neighbors. And Oklahoma is a good example. On a bill basis, a residential customer in Oklahoma pays about the same, almost identical, as a retail customer in Kansas, or at least comparing Evergy's system to them. But an Oklahoman gets to use 25% more energy than a Kansan does. To put that into perspective, if we go rent a car and it costs $100 and you get the 2021 Corvette Stingray with a center-mounted engine and I get a 1997 Toyota Corolla, yeah, we've paid the same bill, but you got a lot more car for yours. It's the value that we receive and the rate that we pay that's the relevant statistic. And that's why we're so focused on that issue. Finally, this bill preserves 2 key items. First, cooperative principles. As drafted, it's not going to affect electric cooperatives or municipal utilities. They are still exempt from the KCC's jurisdiction. There are circumstances where they can become regulated by the KCC if a complaint is brought. And we don't want that scenario to chill the discussion on this legislation, so my written remarks in front of you contain a proposed exemption that would ensure that they aren't subject to this legislation. And finally, this bill also allows us changes in the federal, or at the federal level, to be quickly passed through to Kansans. And to round that out, finally, there were 2 major issues that came before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in the past few years that resulted in rate reductions for Kansans: the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and a complaint the KCC brought against Westar Evergy. Those 2 cases resulted in tens of millions of dollars of savings for Kansans, and House Bill 2180 preserves the ability to pass through those savings if something like that happens again. We urge your support for House Bill 2180. We believe it will greatly help the ratepayers in the state while protecting the utilities investments. And with that, I would be more than happy to stand for questions now or at the appropriate time.
Ranking Minority Member Representative Keither, I see your hand up.
I apologize again. I'm so intent in listening, I forgot to take it down, Mr. Chairman. This is getting bad.
I'm trying to make sure you don't feel like I'm ignoring you. Okay. Thank you. Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Vincent, for your testimony. I've noticed both the previous conferee and you both stated that the AECOM report said transmission investments contributed greatly to the I guess the overall bill. Maybe that's, I can't remember how you phrased it, but you left out the part 2 on the conclusion from AECOM that those higher transmission costs were pretty much were offset by lower generation costs. And I think that's an important thing to consider, and that's why transmission was built. I don't think you or Ms. Patton were suggesting not to build transmission, but the movement of cheaper power around the state and around the region is really critical to the stability of the area. And I just wanted to point out that you stated correctly the first part of the conclusion in AECOM, but left off the last half. So I just wanted to bring that up.
With your permission, if I could add a little, fully dive into that. The AECOM study does show that transmission costs have gone down from about 2015 to 2019, I think is the AECOM study period, and it uses the locational marginal price to reach that conclusion. But there are 3 components to that cost: the marginal cost of energy, the cost of congestion that transmission eliminates, and line losses. And what you're not able to tell from that chart is how those individual components changed over time. It's entirely possible that the overwhelming majority of the decrease in transmission costs, or the decrease in the wholesale cost of energy, is attributable to more wind resources coming online. and that the congestion component may have decreased, but not as much. It's not a main driving factor behind that. And you're not able to view that if you're just looking at the locational margin or the wholesale cost of energy. You need to see those three components. The second point I would add is we agree transmission has unlocked the ability to get low-cost energy in Kansas, but with transmission rates up over 300% since the TDC was enacted, and with SPP having the lowest wholesale cost of energy of any organized electric market in the country, then that goal has been met, and it's time to reel it back in.
Thank you, Mr. Vincent, and not to get in further discussion because I know we have lots of conferees, but you know, when the TDC was first put in, if my memory's correct, there was no east-west major transmission line in the state, and that caused a lot of problems for customers, from reliability to costs and so forth. That major line was built and is now providing benefits, as the AECOM reported, in lower generation costs. So, you know, there are reasons transmission is put in, and I think it's important to understand the state of transmission in the state prior to the TDC and now after the TDC. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you. Representative Turner. Well, if you got a question, go ahead and ask it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your testimony, you mentioned the difference in the return on equity that allowed by FERC, and you mentioned that half of that basically is the incentive adder. What quickly is the incentive adder?
Sure. So at a high level, FERC awards a higher return for utilities that participate in regional transmission organizations. So they set a base return on equity. So for Evergy, that's the former Westar system, that's 9.8%, and then they put a little bit extra on top because they're in SPP. There is an ongoing case at FERC seeing if it's appropriate to have that incentive adder at this time.
Any other questions? I have one. I have a lot of constituents that are asking about all the transmission lines also, and I know that we built some a lot for the wind farms to send that energy out of state. Is part of our electrical rates that the utilities in state pay, are they involved in that transmission for the wind farms to go out of state, or can you answer that question?
Before you at this moment, I would not be comfortable giving you a specific percentage or dollar figure of that. It depends on how that project was studied and analyzed under SPP, whether it's part of their base plan funding program where those costs are socialized across the entire region or not. But that's something we can run to ground for you, absolutely.
Because I have constituents asking that, and I think, you know, it's changed a lot in the last 10 years, and so that was what I was wondering, because most of the transmission had to be provided by an IOU or whatever first. Did you have a question? Annie, is your hand up this time for sure?
Yes, it is.
Okay, ranking minority member Annie, Representative Keeter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I've been a representative for a long time, and I've been on this committee from day one. And the transmission lines that have been built the most recently were started in concerns about congestion and whatnot, and getting to different places of the state. And it was way before most of the wind really started coming in. So obviously the grid is changing with what we're putting on it from Kansas, but those lines, the 345s and others, were built because we needed those larger transmission lines. So I don't think it all just wind, but you know, that's my 2 cents.
Oh, I totally agree with you, Representative. I'm not saying it is wind. I'm just saying that with the combination, there were some questions being asked me. I can't answer them without the facts, and that's all I want is the facts. So, any other questions? Representative Samsel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just an administrative question, maybe for Barbara, but I got the very helpful email 116 yesterday with the testimony. Is there also a document or email, have I overlooked one somewhere, that has the list of all proponents, neutral opponents, if you will, that kind of summarizes that all together? Or am I thinking of the wrong committee on this one?
I think that our committee assistant has them all very well done with all of them online. I'll let her answer that. So,
I believe I sent the chair agenda yesterday late, before 5, and it has everyone listed in email.
Okay. Is that the best place to look for it then? I'm not trying to be difficult. I just can't find it in my email inbox versus on the House bill page. Is it also listed there?
Representative Schreiber.
Representative Samsel, I believe the email that Ms. Moore was speaking about was sent at 4:33 yesterday afternoon.
Thank you. Sorry for my oversight.
No problem. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
We're going to go move to no other proponents in person or virtual. We have written proponents. Randy Stuckey with Vice President Government Affairs and General Counsel with written testimony from the Kansas Feed and Grain Dealers Association, Renewable Kansas Biofuels Association, Kansas Agribusiness Retailers Association. I believe everyone has a copy of it because I have a copy of it here, so I know it's in the testimony somewhere. Also, Ernest, and I don't know if I'm going to say this right, Koleski with AARP, that is also here because I have it printed out also, so it should be on your website. That concludes the hearing on the proponent side, oral and written. I would like to ask some of the opposition that's next. We're going to move to the opponent side. I know you don't have any time, and I could be happy to move you to Tuesday to go first off. That way you have all your people in the opposition to come and do that. Would you prefer to do that? Because we just can't get through it in this amount of time we have left. What is first one on there is Darren Ives with Energy. Is he here? You're on the list. Would you prefer to do your presentation when you have time to do it like everybody else had without being pushed?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'd rather have the time to talk to
Okay, and also Whitney Dameron, I see he's here. Whitney, are you okay with that? I'm asking you. I'll tell you what I want. Okay, we'll move the opponent section of the hearing to Tuesday, so we will close the hearing on, well, okay, we'll just, what am I supposed to say? Continue the hearing on Tuesday for the opponent section of the hearing. Any other questions from the committee for this? Yes. Yeah, right. That way everything's, that's all done in one deal and it's not split up so everybody gets good. With that, seeing no other questions, we will close today. Thank you for coming.